You know, it has been a good while since we last sat down and talked about X Factor. I want to say that the last time we had properly sat down and talked about X Factor was like the early parts of Legion Quest. Now, technically, we did talk about X Factor over in X-Men Prime, where you had that book kind of setting up things for post-Age of Apocalypse, but that was only for a few pages. Now, technically, this two-part story arc is picking up where that part in X-Men Prime had left off at. You see, in X-Men Prime, we had a few pages that were technically dedicated over to X Factor to kind of set things up for them post-Age of Apocalypse. In those few pages, you had basically X Factor going after Mystique. Now, they were able to capture Mystique, but here comes the big problem. You see, when it came to Havoc, we learned that he was having a hard time controlling his powers to the point where he had no choice but to let loose. When he did, he blew up a dam. Now, luckily for our heroes, they were able to kind of handle that situation. The problem is right now is why can't Havoc control his abilities? Now, we're going to cover a two-part story arc that takes place in X Factor number 112 and 113. Now, with this two-part story arc, I should also mention that we kind of jump right in the middle of the storyline. And what I mean by that is this picks up like hours and hours after Havoc had apparently blew up that dam. So we are kind of missing a few pieces between that story and this one, but you do have this two-part story arc kind of help us to fill in the missing blanks. So let me explain. As we dive into X Factor number 112, we pick up with a plane literally crashing the airport in Tokyo, Japan. And here's the reason why, because somebody had tried to kidnap Havoc. You see, when it came to Havoc, after the whole damn situation, he was taken over to Department H. And Department H is in Canada, and they were somewhat trying to help out Havoc. Unfortunately, somebody had kidnapped him and tried to bring him over to what seems to be Genosha, but apparently they had failed and they had crash landed in Tokyo, Japan. And so you had our hero being able to kind of get out of the plane that just crashed and go into the city of Tokyo. Now, 7 hours later, you do have X Factor arrive at Tokyo to find their missing teammate. The problem is that they were confronted by Dragon's Claw. Now, Dragon's Claw original name was Saberize, and we met them in the earlier parts of our coverage over the X-Men. The only thing you know about them is that they belong to a crime lord known as Tatsuo. Now, when it comes to Dragon Claw, they were sent there by their boss to keep X Factor busy long enough to allow somebody else to find Havoc. Now, we also see that we have two new team members on the team. That'll be Mystique and also Wild Child. Now, this two-part story arc does explain why each of those characters are now on the team, but later on in the story. But you do have our heroes being able to take down Dragon's Claw. Now, after doing that, they tell our heroes like, hey, listen, our boss just told us to go out of our way to stop you guys from one of his friends. And that's really it, because somebody else is also trying their best to hunt down Havoc. Now, we do get a page where we see the other character who's supposedly chasing after Havoc, and that would be a character known as Fatale. Now, the reason why I'm saying Fatale is because she is French, I want to say, and she is a European assassin. In French, they say it like that. Now, I could be wrong, could be fatal, but I think it's Fatale because of French. Either way, though, she's right now chasing after Havoc. Now, technically, she did first appear in Uncanny X-Men 310, but we didn't talk much about her, and the reason why, because our main focus then was on Cable and also Cyclops. Now, for Havoc, you have him just running around Tokyo. Now, for Havoc, his powers being haywire also affect his mind and his body as well. So, unfortunately, he's walking funny. He's very dizzy. He can't think straight. But he does run into a character known as Scarlet McKenzie. Now, for Scarlet McKenzie, she had appeared in a storyline that we didn't cover called Havoc and Wolverine Meltdown. Now, in that storyline, she was a Soviet agent. But here comes the big catch. she died at the end of that storyline. So we're kind of left to wonder, how in the world right now is she alive again? Now, apparently, she was the one who had kidnapped Havok from Department H and tried to bring him over to Genosha. Again, we have no idea why. But for Havok, he knows there should be no way that she is alive again. So you have Havok just run away freaking out. But for Scarlet, she's not going to give up that easily. Now, for a brief moment, we do jump over to Random. Now, for Random, he is a mercenary, but his mutant ability helps him adapt to any type of situation, especially when it comes to fighting against other mutants. Now, we see him at home, right? He gets a phone call. Now, his roommate walks into the room, and we saw her in the earlier parts of our coverage over X Factor. Here comes the big catch. He reabsorbs her, like apparently he made her out of himself. But after that phone call, he reabsorbs her and just melts down, leaving us wondering what in the world happened with that phone call. We do see Tatsuo meeting up with the Dragon's Claw crew, his actual crew. Now, we do learn here that his friend is Fatale. Now, again, I'm only calling her Fatale because she is from France. I could be wrong. Either way, when it comes to Fatale, she basically only asked Dragon Claw to keep X Factor busy long enough until she was able to arrive in Tokyo. And now with her being there, she can now go after, good old Havok. And you do have the rest of X Factor trying their best to also find Havok. Like, for example, we pick up with Forge and Mystique. Now, technically, we use this conversation right here to kind of get a better idea of how in the world is Mystique part of X Factor right now? And we learned that after our heroes were able to capture her back in X-Men Prime, you had Forge implant some kind of chip into her mind, basically a tracker. But at the same time, if she does try to use her powers to hide her appearance, he'll still be able to figure out who she is or who she's trying to pretend to be. Either way, he said you have two choices: jail or join us. And so, of course, she joined X Factor. Now, when it comes to Wild Child, the reason why he's on the team because he was there at Department H when you had Scarlet go out of her way to try to kidnap Havok. And so because of that, he's kind of like, listen, I'll leave Alpha Flight and come over here to help you guys with this situation. Now, you do have all the different active parties arrive at the club. Now, once they do arrive at the club, for X Factor, their main goal is to have Havok put on this suit. And once he does, the suit should supposedly help contain his powers, help him control his powers. But the problem is for Havok, he's not really listening because, again, his powers are making him kind of confused, but also not being able to think straight. And so for Havok, he begins to fight against some of the members of X Factor. Now, in the club, you have all these different people begin to freak out because you got mutants everywhere. And so, of course, they're kind of like, yo, we gotta get out of here. But in the middle of the entire scene, you have Fatale being able to sneak up on Havok and then stab him in the back. Now, we already know that Havok is not dead or seriously injured. Matter of fact, for Havok, he was only poisoned. Now, for Fatale, she was hired by somebody else. And of course, that person said, make sure Havok does not get over to Genosha, meaning that she is an enemy of Scarlet who's trying her best to get Havok over to Genosha. Either way, you do have Fatale being able to go toe-to-toe with our heroes because she's one of the best assassins, apparently, from Europe. And so with that kind of, thing under her belt, she's able to take down our heroes just like that. And she grabs Havok and being able to use her mutant ability to just disappear. Now, for Wild Child, he sees Scarlet and he knows, hey, you're the person who had kidnapped Havok from Department H back in Canada. And so you have Wild Child trying to go after Scarlet. But unfortunately, he also loses her as well. And so for our heroes, their main goal right now is to split up, to hopefully find Havok, find Fatale, but maybe, just maybe, find Scarlet as well. Now, we do see Fatale take Havoc over to a warehouse, and we learn here that yes, she was hired by somebody else, and the reason why, because her boss kind of realized that for Havoc, he's going through some kind of change. And so because of that change, it piqued the interest of her boss. And so right now, it's just a waiting game. They're waiting for their transport to take Havoc over to her boss. Now, for Fatale, she put Havoc in some kind of device where he is unable to use his powers at all, but also it kind of helps him relax a tad bit more and think straight. Now, she leaves to go see if their transport had arrived, except right after she leaves, you didn't have Yukio appear. Now, Yukio is a character we talked about before, but mostly over in Wolverine comics. You see, for Yukio, she was a small-time lover of Wolverine, but also a close ally of his, and also for Storm as well. But she saw the whole thing go down to X Factor and Fatale, and she kind of realized that she has to help X Factor out. And so as soon as Fatale left, you had Yukio walk in and say, "Let me try to get you the heck out of that device that she put you in." Now, for Polaris and also Mystique, you have those two characters go after Masuo to kind of see if he knows where Fatale could possibly be at. And so you do have him kind of tell them like, okay, you know what? I might have a location, but please don't kill me, because you do have Polaris kind of hanging him mid-air at the moment. Now, you do have Wild Child and Forge trying their best to use the powers of Wild Child to follow the scent of Havok and also Fatale. But while trying to do that, you didn't have Wild Child kind of bring up the idea that Forge needs to be very careful, because yes, you may believe you have everything handled when it comes to Mystique, but it is Mystique. She's one tricky character. Most likely, she's able to get anything if she wants to. And so you have Forge kind of being very confident of the idea that he had everything handled. But as we switch back over to Yukio and also Havok, you have Yukio trying everything she can to get Havok out of that device. The problem is that you have Fatale come back. Now, this kind of gives us a cool battle between these two characters. The problem is that as the battle goes on, Havok's powers once again begin to go a tad bit wild, because again, that poison had left his body, and so he's no longer able to kind of control his powers. And so out of nowhere, he has to release all that energy and out of him, causing a huge explosion in that area. Now, you do have X Factor being able to find Havok after the explosion, but once they do find Havok, they also find Yukio as well. Now, for Mystique, she does bring up a good point here. If Yukio has survived that explosion, then most likely so did Fatale. The problem is that Fatale is no longer around, but we do learn one of the two people who were trying to go after Havok. Because as we jump over to Scarlet, we see Scarlet meeting up with the Sugar Man. Now remember, the Sugar Man is in control of Genosha, but also this character comes from the Age of Apocalypse timeline, because when it came to X-Men Omega, he was able to come over to this timeline, but 20 years in the past. And so in those 20 years, he has been working behind the scenes when it came to Genosha. But now apparently he has a special reasoning behind why he wants Havok for. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.